Imagine spending your final hours alive, knowing exactly when and how your life will end. The clock is ticking, the guards are watching, and the world outside has already judged you guilty. In that haunting silence of death row, one last question arrives. What would you like for your final meal? It's a bizarre ritual that feels almost theatrical, allowing someone condemned to die a chance at one final taste of freedom, a last indulgence before the ultimate punishment. Across prisons in America and in other parts of the world, the last meal has become one of the most haunting yet strangely fascinating traditions connected to capital punishment. It's not just food. It's psychology, symbolism, protest, and sometimes even pure shock value. And over the years, some of these requests have been so strange, so unbelievable, that they've sparked curiosity, debate, and even controversy far beyond prison walls. Some inmates, when faced with their mortality, chose simple, comforting foods from childhood, like fried chicken, pie, or ice cream. Others went the opposite direction, making bizarre or symbolic demands that seemed to send a final message to the world. Imagine asking for nothing but a single olive with the seed still inside, believing it might sprout into a tree of peace above your grave. Or demanding a pile of dirt for a ritual, only to be denied because prison rules forbid it. These aren't just meals. They're cryptic statements left behind by people society has already written off. There are also those who went over the top, demanding feasts so excessive that it felt less like a meal and more like a banquet fit for kings. Stacks of steaks, mountains of burgers, buckets of fried food, gallons of soda, and enough dessert to fill an entire bakery. But here's the twist. Some of them never touched a single bite. In one infamous case, a prisoner ordered a meal big enough to feed 10 people and then refused to eat any of it. The stunt was so outrageous that it forced the entire state of Texas to abolish the last meal tradition altogether. Why do these last meals fascinate us so much? Maybe because food is universal. It connects us all. No matter who you are or what you've done, eating is one of the most basic human experiences. To see what a condemned man or woman chooses in their final moment of agency gives us a glimpse into their psychology. Are they clinging to nostalgia, making a statement, seeking comfort? Or perhaps mocking the very system that's about to kill them? This is why last meal requests remain such a chilling yet compelling subject. They're part human drama, part dark theater, and part reflection of who we are as a society. Today, we're diving into the most unbelievable last meal requests ever recorded on death row, the ones that made people gasp, laugh, or shake their heads in disbelief. From the strange and symbolic to the extravagant and absurd, these stories reveal not only what prisoners ate in their final hours, but also what they wanted to say when words were no longer enough. When we think of a final meal, most of us imagine something comforting, like a favorite dish from childhood or a special treat that brings back memories. But for some death row inmates, their requests went far beyond comfort food. They entered the realm of the bizarre, symbolic, and even unsettling. These strange choices not only puzzled prison officials but also fascinated the public, leaving us wondering, what was going through their minds in those final hours? Take the case of Victor Fegwer, a convicted murderer in Iowa. When asked what he wanted for his last meal, Fegwer shocked everyone by requesting only a single olive with the pit still inside. That was it. No bread, no drink, no dessert. Just one olive. Why? According to reports, he believed the olive seed would grow into an olive tree on his grave, a symbolic gesture of peace in a life marked by violence. To many, it was chilling and poetic at the same time. A man condemned to die using his final act to leave behind a symbol of hope and renewal. Then there was James Edward Smith, whose request was even stranger. Instead of food, he asked for a pile of dirt. Yes, actual dirt, because he wanted to perform a voodoo ritual in his cell before execution. Prison officials, of course, denied the request, citing health and safety concerns. Denied his symbolic meal, Smith settled for a cup of plain yogurt instead. It's a moment that shows how last meal requests aren't always about food. Sometimes they're about spiritual beliefs, rituals, or defiance against the system. Another unusual request came from Odell Barnes Jr., who took a political approach to his final meal. Instead of choosing a favorite dish, he asked for justice, equality, and world peace. Obviously, the prison kitchen couldn't serve that, but Barnes used his request to make a statement. It was a powerful reminder that, even in death, some inmates chose to highlight larger issues rather than indulge in a plate of food. One of the most unsettling last meals belonged to Thomas Grasso, executed in Oklahoma. His request included 24 steamed mussels, 24 steamed clams, a Burger King cheeseburger, 6 spare ribs, 2 strawberry milkshakes, half of a pumpkin pie, and a can of SpaghettiOs with meatballs. After finishing the extravagant meal, Grasso's final words included a complaint. "I did not get my SpaghettiOs, I got spaghetti. I want the press to know this." Even in his last moments, he seemed more concerned with the accuracy of his meal than the reality of his impending death. Equally bizarre was Ricky Ray Rector, whose final meal was steak, fried chicken, and pecan pie. What made it strange wasn't the food itself, but what he did afterward. Rector famously left the pecan pie untouched on the tray, telling guards he was saving it for later. Whether it was a sign of confusion, denial, or a final act of dark humor, no one can say for sure. But it became one of the most talked about moments in last meal history. These bizarre requests force us to confront the strange intersection of humanity and death. On one hand, they can seem almost absurd, like black comedy unfolding inside a prison cell. On the other, they reveal something deeply human about people facing the end of their lives. Whether it was the symbolism of an olive, the mysticism of dirt, or the political statement of demanding peace, these last meals show us that even in the shadow of death, people still cling to meaning, sometimes in the strangest ways imaginable. Not every death row inmate chose something simple or symbolic. Some saw the last meal as a final chance to indulge in excess, an opportunity to eat like royalty before facing the execution chamber. These requests often shocked prison officials because of their sheer size, variety, and extravagance. In some cases, they even changed prison policies forever. One of the most infamous examples is Lawrence Russell Brewer, executed in Texas in 2011. Brewer went all out, ordering a meal so massive it could have fed an entire family. His list included 2 chicken fried steaks, a triple bacon cheeseburger with all the fixings, a cheese omelet with ground beef and vegetables, a large bowl of fried okra, 3 fajitas, a meat lover's pizza, 1 pint of ice cream, a slab of peanut butter fudge with crushed peanuts, and 3 root beers. Guards prepared the enormous spread exactly as he requested, but when it arrived, Brewer refused to take even a single bite. He pushed the tray aside and said he wasn't hungry. The stunt outraged politicians and prison staff alike. Texas Senator John Whitmire called it ridiculous and demanded an immediate end to the last meal tradition, arguing that prisoners should not be allowed to waste taxpayer money on food they didn't even intend to eat. Within days, the state of Texas officially abolished last meal requests for death row inmates. From then on, prisoners would be served the same meal as everyone else in the facility, no exceptions. Brewer's actions had permanently changed a tradition that dated back decades. Brewer's case wasn't unique in extravagance, though it was unique in its consequences. Others also used their last meal as a chance to splurge on foods they never expected to taste again. Ronnie Lee Gardner, executed in Utah, ordered surf and turf, a lobster tail and steak, complete with apple pie and vanilla ice cream. He requested the entire meal be eaten while watching the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which prison officials allowed. It wasn't just a meal. It was a whole experience, a final attempt at comfort before the firing squad carried out his sentence. Some extravagant orders reflected personal history or nostalgia. John Wayne Gacy, one of the most notorious serial killers in U.S. history, requested a truly indulgent feast. A dozen deep-fried shrimp, a bucket of KFC fried chicken, a nod to the fast food franchise he once managed, French fries, and a pound of strawberries. It was greasy, excessive, and oddly personal, reflecting both his criminal past and his gluttonous nature. These lavish last meals highlight the strange duality of the tradition. On one side, they humanize the condemned, reminding us that even the most notorious criminals still crave simple pleasures like fried food and dessert. On the other side, they reveal how easily the ritual could be abused, turning a solemn moment into something that felt wasteful, theatrical, or even mocking. The consequences of these extravagant meals, especially brewers, reshaped the way prisons handle death row requests. What was once seen as a final act of mercy became a point of contention, sparking debates about justice, dignity, and whether such indulgences should exist at all. While some death row inmates chose bizarre or extravagant meals, others made requests that were surprisingly ordinary, almost humble. These choices often carried an emotional or symbolic weight, reflecting personal memories, comfort, or even quiet defiance. Sometimes the simplest requests were the ones that left the deepest impression. Take Timothy McVeigh, the man responsible for the Oklahoma City bombing that killed 168 people. His last meal was not a feast, nor anything unusual. Instead, he requested just 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. No steak, no elaborate spread, just a dessert many children might pick as their favorite. To some, it seemed strange that someone responsible for one of the worst acts of domestic terrorism in American history would choose something so innocent and childlike as his final indulgence. That single bowl of ice cream remains one of the most memorable examples of simplicity in last meals. Another example is Ricky Ray Rector, whose final request included steak, fried chicken, and pecan pie. The meal itself wasn't extraordinary, but what he did afterward shocked many. Rector left the pecan pie untouched, telling guards he was saving it for later. Whether it was a sign of his impaired mental state, he had suffered brain damage years earlier, or simply denial about his fate, the act carried a haunting symbolism. It's as though he believed there would still be a later, even as the clock counted down to his execution. Some choices reflected nostalgia for personal history. John Wayne Gacy, as noted earlier, requested fried chicken, a nod to his past as a KFC manager. But others took this idea in softer, more sentimental directions. Nicholas Todd Sutton, executed in Tennessee, requested a fairly simple meal: fried pork chops, mashed potatoes with gravy, and peach pie with vanilla ice cream. He ate it shortly after taking part in his final communion. His meal wasn't about indulgence, but about comfort, familiarity, and spiritual closure. Then there are those who chose nothing at all. Gary Gilmore, famously executed in Utah by firing squad, declined to have a last meal entirely. Instead, he smoked a cigarette and drank a shot of whiskey. When asked for final words, he said, "Let's do it." His refusal to eat reflected his desire to face death on his own terms, without ceremony or comfort. For Gilmore, the absence of a meal was the statement. Even more symbolic was Victor Figuere's olive request, a story we touched on earlier. Where others sought indulgence, Figuere sought symbolism, asking for a single olive with the pit intact. For him, the seed represented peace and the possibility of renewal, even in death. It was hauntingly poetic, and it remains one of the most talked about last meals in history. These ordinary or symbolic choices remind us that the last meal tradition is not always about excess or spectacle. Sometimes it's about comfort, memory, or a final attempt to leave behind meaning. Whether through ice cream, pie, pork chops, or even nothing at all, these inmates revealed something deeply human. In the face of death, many cling to the simple, familiar things that once made life worth living. When we step back and look at the tradition of last meal requests, it becomes clear that this ritual is about much more than food. It's a glimpse into the human mind at the edge of life. Every choice, whether bizarre, extravagant, ordinary, or symbolic, tells us something about how people confront mortality when time is running out. On one level, the last meal is an act of mercy. Granting a condemned prisoner one final comfort before execution is meant to soften the harshness of capital punishment, to remind society that even those who have committed terrible crimes are still human. But it is also an act full of contradictions. How can a plate of fried chicken or a bowl of ice cream balance out the finality of death? How does granting a small pleasure sit alongside the brutality of state-sanctioned execution? These questions are what make last meal requests so fascinating and so unsettling. The stories of strange requests, like a single olive, a pile of dirt, or a meal big enough for 10 people, often become sensational headlines. They spark laughter, confusion, or outrage. But behind the shock value lies a deeper truth. Food is one of the most basic human needs. Even in their final hours, people cling to it for comfort, identity, or protest. Some use it to send a message, others to relive a memory, and still others to reject the ritual altogether by refusing to eat. In many ways, last meals serve as a mirror, reflecting the broader debates around the death penalty itself. Supporters of capital punishment sometimes see these meals as unnecessary indulgences, pointing to cases like Lawrence Brewer, whose gluttonous order and refusal to eat it ended the tradition in Texas. For critics, though, the last meal highlights the paradox of execution. Society shows compassion in one moment and cruelty in the next. Offering fried chicken before a lethal injection or ice cream before a firing squad exposes the strange moral tightrope we walk when taking a human life in the name of justice. Culturally, last meal requests also fascinate the public because they make notorious criminals feel strangely relatable. A serial killer craving fast food or a terrorist choosing mint chocolate chip ice cream reminds us that these figures, as monstrous as their crimes were, still shared basic human tastes. It doesn't excuse their actions, but it forces us to see them as people rather than faceless villains. That tension between the human and the inhuman is at the heart of why last meals remain a subject of endless curiosity. Ultimately, the tradition of last meals tells us less about food and more about humanity. It shows how people confront death, with humor, with nostalgia, with defiance, or with silence. And it challenges us as observers to think about justice, compassion, and what it means to treat someone with dignity at the very end of their life. So the next time you hear about a prisoner's last meal, whether it's an olive, a cheeseburger, or a slice of pie, remember that it isn't just a menu choice. It's a final message, a window into the human spirit, and a haunting reminder of the thin line between mercy and punishment